Hey everyone, welcome into another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the environment in Resident Evil 7, specifically this basement area in the house. And I want to talk a little bit about how I use this environment to kind of inspire me to create the basement, the horror basement environment that I made recently. And you can check that out, a link below if you want to actually get those assets. But I thought it might be interesting just to kind of walk through and just give kind of my thoughts as they come to me about what I'm looking for as far as taking reference photos, looking for little details and things like that to kind of build out an environment like this. We'll also be on the next video, we'll be going through what we kind of learned from this, and I'll be taking the assets that I created for my horror basement environment, and we'll be creating a completely separate environment, completely from scratch, using those assets, and I'll kind of just create something new just to kind of show you guys how to create another environment like this. So I hope you find this useful. If you do, be sure to leave me a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like these types of videos, be sure to let me know. And if there's any other environments or games specifically that you would like me to look at and do a walkthrough similar to this, I would love to do that. I really enjoy making these kind of videos. And if you want to support me even further, you can check out the links below where I do sell other assets on Fab. And I also have a Patreon where you get access to, early access to these videos, but also access to assets that I create, as well as lots of other perks. We also have a great Discord and community there. Be sure to check those out. Links below. All right, let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to kind of do is just talk a little bit about the overall mood and feel of an environment like this. I'm just kind of looking for descriptive words. Now, obviously, I think this is a pretty easy environment to do, so that's kind of why I picked this. But, you know, it's very dark, it's very grimy, it's very wet and damp, very moldy. So I like to kind of just jot down some notes like that and just kind of get some descriptive words of the type of environment that I'm looking for. That also helps me when I'm just Googling for, you know, other images, or maybe I'm looking on ArtStation or something like that to get similar environments. Now, the things that I kind of like to look for at first are the bigger details. So I like to kind of just start with maybe like the walls here, just kind of get some ideas of what the textures are looking like, what they're doing here. Most of these are, you know, fairly large kind of cinder brick type materials that they're using. And I really like how there's a lot of depth to the materials. It looks like they are actually kind of even working some of the geometry in here to have some of these cinder blocks kind of sticking out a little bit. Some of them aren't, you know, it looks like this area is pretty clean here. But you can really tell that they took a lot of time to just really make this look really worn down, very just kind of gross and damp. You know, you've got a lot of water leaks here and stuff like that. Just some of the other kind of bigger details that we can notice. You know, we do notice that we have like multiple kind of repeating assets, like this door frame here. The doors are pretty similar in a lot of areas. This door specifically, I think I've seen this in a lot of areas throughout the house. But I don't want to get too much into the small details right now. I really just want to kind of continue kind of getting a feel of the overall environment and just kind of getting an idea of what we're looking at. So again, one of the things that I feel like they do a really good job here is just keeping everything just really highly detailed. There's not many areas that have just like an empty wall or anything like that. Even if it is an empty wall, you'll notice that they just have like a lot of grime or this mold or things like that. And even in the ceiling, you know, they have just like these, I don't know what all that is, mold, I guess, just old pieces of insulation and stuff hanging down there. Now, as we start kind of looking at the smaller details, I like to look at things like this palette. Hey, look, there's a coin there. Other things just like, you know, these cinder blocks. I keep wanting to call them cinder bricks for some reason. But, you know, these old painting supplies, things like that. Again, everything is just like really dirty and just kind of worn down looking, and that really works well for this environment. Other things like this, as far as kind of taking reference photos, I really like to take a lot of reference photos of kind of the smaller or like medium size assets like this. So I might take a few photos. I try to get something kind of lined up head on from a good front perspective. And then I want to kind of come and take a few shots from the sides. It's a very cramped environment here, so it is kind of hard to get, everything in the shot, but just kind of get as much as you can. And then, looking at little details like this is really good to just get an idea of, you can actually see they have like a little hook there that's holding on. Just really nice little details like that really add a lot to your environments. And then, other things just like looking at the floor and just looking at all of these kind of chipped walls and pieces of the floor that have broken up, and just kind of getting some ideas how we can either create, either actual assets, or those might just be decals that they're using there. Things like these tarps are pretty easy to make. There's a lot of them laying around, and they really work well just to just kind of make the environment really feel lived in and really just messy and gross. Some other things that I like to kind of just take note of are, pieces of wood like this. You can kind of get away with creating just maybe one piece of wood like this and then using it in multiple areas. Even these pieces down here, I don't know if those are the same things as those. Probably aren't, but you could honestly just use those to line on the bottom of the floor here. One thing that I think really helps environments like this is not to just have a wall that just goes straight down to the floor. If you look at it in real life, you often don't have that. You a lot of times have like either this kind of base, I don't know, piece of wood here, or sometimes there's like another layer of concrete foundation or something there, just to kind of keep things broken up a little bit. All of these pieces of wood going around the top here, those are great little details that you don't really notice a lot of times when you're playing a game like this, but you don't notice them because they just look natural a lot of times. As we continue to just kind of look at details, take note of the pipes here. I always like bringing this area up right here. I don't know what kind of plumber laid these pipes out, but this makes absolutely zero sense. But I can just imagine that, some poor environment artist had to come in and was told, hey, we need to fill this wall with pipes. And you're like, okay, I'll do the best I can. It is pretty funny, though. This just really makes no sense. But, again, it's one of those things that you probably just walk by, don't really even notice. You just see a bunch of pipes on the wall. Similar things on the ceilings in here. If you look in here, we've got just tons and tons of pipes going who knows where. A lot of this doesn't make any sense, but it does kind of help fill in the environment. That is one thing that I do try to think about whenever I'm creating environments, especially like this. I'm not a plumber. I've never built a house like this, but I can at least just kind of think logically how pipes would be set up. So if you have a pipe coming out here, then maybe you could have a couple of pipes going down and then maybe like a couple of pipes going out that way. It doesn't really make sense that you have all these pipes laid out like this, but, again, it does kind of help to fill in the environment. Now, they do have other things like these little junction boxes and wires. These are great things, especially wires like this, to use to fill in environments like this and just make it look more realistic and lived in. These are really easy to make with just a spline as well, so you can usually get away with just having one or two small assets and then create a spline out of those, which I will show you how to do that. And then you can just kind of layer them throughout the environment, put them all over the place. And then just looking at smaller assets here, looking at things that we can reuse a lot of. Things like this bucket. If you walk through here, the trash, the boxes, you'll notice that this is reused multiple times in multiple areas. I like just taking some shots of these corners, just areas like this where there's just a lot of junk filled in. You can get some good ideas just to kind of see what, it would look like to just kind of fill in areas like this. Again, there's another bucket there, another trash bag. Pieces of wood like this are great. You can really just get away with having 1 or 2, maybe 3 pieces of wood, and then just kind of duplicate them, stretch them out a little bit, scale them, rotate them, and then just laying them out in the environment like this is a great way. Similar to same thing with these cinder blocks. You can get away with putting a lot of those in your environment and just making it look very lived in. This is a great area too. So I'd probably take a screenshot here just to get an idea of how to kind of fill in some shelves. There's a lot of good things here to see how just to kind of break up the repetition. Just don't stack 10 boxes on here. Or even if you do, at least kind of stagger them and move them around and things like that. But they do a really good job here with, they have quite a few assets here. You might not have this many assets for, a smaller pack if you're getting something off Fab or something. But, you can see like this is the same thing as that and that are all the same. And then these boxes are all the same. There and there, there and there. Those boxes are the same. So they are just kind of copying and pasting a lot of things. But you can kind of get away with that if you really just place things in, natural looking areas that look like it would be, just kind of gathered over time. I really like how they have this shelf here that looks like it's had stuff stacked on it over the years and it's kind of buckled over the weight of it and things like that. It's really nice details. And then lastly, just looking at smaller details, things like decals. Look how they're probably Vertex painting the puddles in here. They could be decals, I'm not sure. But looking at things like that, just again, how these floors are obviously not going to be clean basically anywhere in an environment like this. So if you're making something like this, you obviously want to just really fill this with decals of trash and cracks and damage and things like that, water puddles. It's really a great way to make it look more natural and kind of really lived in. Then the last thing that I want to talk about is just the lighting in general. So we won't go too much into lighting, but it is good to note the lighting and just kind of get an idea, think about how they're lighting these areas. So I'm guessing that they are probably doing a couple of different techniques. So they're probably doing like an initial baked lighting pass where they put lights in here, they bake the global illumination and the fill lights in here, and then they're going back in and putting these real-time lights that are actually casting the shadows. And I like to just kind of look at lights and just see like what is casting a shadow. Obviously this light right here is casting a shadow, but if we go in here, I don't think that light is casting a shadow. That may even just be like an emissive material that they have on there and they're lighting it up that way. But just kind of take note of how they're placing their lights. Real-time lights are obviously going to be much more expensive. And these are probably, if I had to guess, just kind of looking at the profile, they're probably spotlights as opposed to something like a point light. Point light is going to be way more heavy on performance. I think it's 6 times more expensive on performance than a spotlight. So keep that in mind when you are lighting your environments like this. Now, with Unreal Engine, we don't really talk much about baked lighting anymore, especially Unreal Engine 5. They have really pushed real-time solutions with Lumen being enabled by default, and more recently, megalights, the introduction of megalights, although it's still pretty experimental. Those things are getting better and better. I do want to do a more in-depth tutorial on lighting, and we will cover baked lighting, but sadly it is kind of a thing that I feel like is going away because real-time solutions are just getting much more popular. To be honest, they are just much easier to work with, and they're much, much faster to work with as well. But obviously, if you need real-time shadows, which a lot of these lights are, then you will need to have, at least stationary lights or movable lights for those. But the other thing that you can note is, they are pretty careful about where they place the lights. They don't have too many lights that are overlapping. So, we have a light here that's casting a shadow, and then, really, if you're thinking kind of like your attenuation radius, it really only needs to go to about there. And then you have your other light here with an attenuation radius that is really probably just stopping right about there. So they're keeping that pretty small. If you look at this light over here, you don't really need a very big attenuation radius. Out here, you don't really see any shadow here. So your shadow is kind of stopping around here. So, kind of thinking in terms of how big is that attenuation radius. They're keeping those pretty small. Let's see, we have, looks like one light there. Yeah, just one light that's filling this environment. So again, they're really just kind of keeping these lights as spread out as they can. And these are probably just spotlights, if I had to guess. Although this is actually shining a shadow in here, so I'm not sure what they're doing there. They may have a point light that they have right here, or they may just be using a separate spotlight to shine in here. But it's one of those things that you kind of just have to play around with, experiment with. And it's also just one of those things that, it just depends on your budget for what kind of hardware you're aiming for. And you can get away with having more lights, more overlapping lights if you are not too worried about performance or, running a game on lower hardware. But it's obviously just something just to keep in mind, when you're placing lights. Just try to be strategic about where you're placing them and having as few lights as possible to still get the results that you want. All right, so I hope you guys found that useful. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Like I said, in the next video, we will be creating an actual environment. We're not going to just straight up copy this environment, but I want to just create something using the horror basement environment that I created. And we'll use those assets and just put together something that I think will be fun. So if you guys have any questions about anything, as always, feel free to let me know. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day or night, and I will see you next time. Take care, guys.